Hey, it's Art from My New Microphone. In this video, let's discuss the similarities and differences between multiband compression and dynamic EQ. Starting with multiband compression, a multiband compressor is a dynamics processor that effectively splits an audio signal into different frequency bands and then acts to compress each of those bands independently. A multiband compressor, therefore, can be thought of as multiple compressors in one, with each compressor acting upon its own dedicated frequency band. Each band's compressor will have its own independent parameters, including threshold, ratio, attack time, release time, knee, makeup gain, etc. And there may also be master controls or global controls over the entire multiband compressor itself. So with multiband compression, we can effectively compress the low end differently than the mid-range, differently than the high end, or however many other bands we decide to use in our multiband compressor. Dynamic EQ is a type of equalization where the actual EQ move or filter of a specified frequency band is only triggered as the frequencies within that band surpass a set amplitude threshold. So you see that dynamic EQ, like multiband compression, is a dynamic process. Dynamic EQ is similar to multiband compression in that it can attenuate certain frequency bands as the frequency content within those bands surpasses a set threshold. A big difference here is that multiband compressors utilize crossover frequencies to split up their different bands, while dynamic EQ works much more like an EQ, where its frequency band is almost independent of the other bands within the EQ. Additionally, dynamic EQ actually has the capability of boosting a frequency band as the energy in that band surpasses a set threshold. Compression, as we may know, only acts to attenuate the peak level of a signal and will not be able to boost it. So multiband compression and dynamic EQ are rather similar. However, there are small differences that I wanted to point out here. Both are often used for de-essing as a great example, where we can really hone in on a specific frequency band and only duck that frequency band as the energy surpasses a set threshold. De-essing, as the name would suggest, is particularly useful for ridding of the sibilants in particularly sibilant vocals by only focusing on that sibilant range between, say, 3000 Hz and 7000 Hz. By using a proper de-esser, or indeed a dynamic EQ or multiband compressor, we can really focus on that specific frequency band without having the other frequency bands affected by the processing. So with that, let's hop into Logic Pro and have a better look at a dynamic EQ and a multiband compressor to compare and contrast how we can use them. All right, here we are inside of Logic Pro to discuss multiband compression and dynamic EQ. In this session, we are working on a song called The Unending Maze by one of my projects called Blunt Cousin. And we have right here the FabFilter Pro Q3, which we will be using for dynamic EQ. We also have the FabFilter Pro MB, which we will be using for multiband compression. Now, these FabFilter plugins are a lot more powerful than just dynamic EQ or multiband compression. They have a lot of advanced features on them. However, for this video, we will just be focusing on the basics of it. So I may gloss over some of the parameters, but just know that we will be focusing more so on the basics in this video and foregoing some of the more advanced features of these plugins. If you're interested in checking out these plugins for yourself, they're a little bit expensive. I will leave a link in the description box down below. I really enjoy them, and so I wanted to use them for this training, even though, again, they are a little bit more advanced. So let's start by just listening here. We will be working just on this guitar part where we have it soloed. We have a cool kind of whole tone riff going on right here. So we'll listen to it without these two engaged, and then we will go about working with multiband compression and dynamic EQ to look at the similarities and differences. So there we have it, just a guitar in solo. And again, we have these two effects, the multiband compressor and the EQ here inserted on the guitar track, which is in solo. So let's start with the multiband compression, as I believe it's a little bit more easy to understand. And right here, I have set up a low frequency, mid frequency, and high frequency compressor. You can see that as I click to these different compressors, or these different frequency bands, we have different parameters here for the compressor. So the basic controls we have are the threshold, of course, the ratio, the attack, release, knee control, the look ahead, and the output level, or the makeup gain. This range knob right here is a little bit more advanced. It limits the maximum amount of applied gain change. So we will sort of leave this as is and adjust it if necessary, if we're really bumping up against the limit right here. We can also boost this, which gets into expansion territory. Again, more advanced features. We will just be focusing on the compression in this case. So if we turn this on and listen back, You see that if there's low-end information, it will trigger this compressor. Mid-range information will trigger this compressor. High-frequency information will trigger this compressor. If we brought this range down, there's barely any information in this range below 104 hertz, and so this compressor isn't going to get too engaged unless, again, we bring down this threshold. And likewise, we can change these cutoff frequencies or crossover frequencies to adjust the different bands. And then we can go in and adjust each of these bands with their own independent compression controls here. And that again includes threshold, attack, release time, output gain, ratio, knee, and look ahead in this case. So that covers the basics of multiband compression. All right, let's move on to EQ now. Open this Pro Q3 up. And what we can do here with the Pro Q3 is create a new EQ frequency band right here. And we have all of the typical controls. We can control whether it's a bell, low shelf, low cut, high shelf, high cut, notch, etc. We can control the frequency, the gain, whether it's a boost or a cut, and the Q in the case of the bell frequency, which will narrow or widen the EQ right here. But we can also right click and make this dynamic as well. And you see here that this gain has changed a little bit. It has this outer circle on it. And if we hover over here, we see that the band 1 dynamic range is negative 1.95 dB. So in addition to this static negative 5.86 dB at 613 hertz, we also have a dynamic portion of that EQ that gives us a additional negative about 2 dB cut. So for the sake of explaining dynamic EQ, I'll actually bring the static EQ back up here to 0 so that we don't have any static EQ and we only have dynamic EQ in this band. And we'll only work with one band in this video just to keep things simple. So let's move this up to say 1000 hertz. Again, we have all of the same controls, except right here, let's bring this dynamic range down to say negative 6 dB. And now we have a very wide Q right here. So we are going to be taking energy from this frequency band right here. And if the energy within this frequency band exceeds a certain set threshold, then this dynamic EQ will trigger and it will cut the audio signal. Now right here, you see auto in this particular plugin, and this brings up our threshold. So we can control the set threshold of this specific frequency band. So now if we play things back, we will see this light up. So there's just enough energy right here to surpass the threshold a little bit. And if we surpass the threshold by bringing it down quite a bit more, then we can reach that full negative 6 dB or that 6 dB cut. If we adjust the threshold, we can have it so that it only touches the dynamic EQ and the dynamic EQ never reaches its full potential. So you can see how that's very similar to how a multi-band compressor may act upon this specific frequency band. However, of course, we aren't using crossover frequencies to split up the entire signal into its own distinct frequency bands. We just have a simple EQ bell curve right here. But now what's cool is we can actually come here to the dynamic range and bring it up 6 dB. And so now we have a situation where when the energy in this specific frequency band surpasses this threshold, it will actually get boosted rather than attenuated. Here's what that sounds like. Again, we can bring up the threshold so that it's never surpassed and none of that dynamic EQ actually happens. Or we can bring it down so that the dynamic EQ is triggered quite regularly. And of course, we can go in and add additional dynamic EQs here as we see fit. Let's bring this one down, for example, just to give a sense of how dynamic EQ can work. And we can even bring this up so that it's overlapping much with this frequency band right here, which is not really possible in multiband compression. So let's see and hear what this sounds like. So you can see that the curve has some overlap right here. So I'm not going through and trying to mix this guitar in the context of the mix right now with these dynamic EQ and multiband compression moves. Rather, I'm just trying to show you the differences and similarities between these two plugins or processes. So that covers the basics of dynamic EQ and multiband compression and how we can go about using it in the mix. Again, these plugins are very powerful and they do a little bit more than just dynamic EQ and multiband compression, but I just wanted to show you these two and show you the basics and the differences and similarities between these two processes. So that's all I have for you right now in Logic. Let's hop out. All right, if you learned something from this video, I would invite you to hit that like button, and I would also invite you to check out the My New Microphone Mixing Cheat Sheet. This is a free resource I put together for you. I'll leave a link to that in the description box down below, where I walk you through step by step to help you make the right decisions at the right times in your mixes. Of course, there are no cheat codes when it comes to mixing, as every mix is different and requires different processing. However, this is the closest I could get to giving you step-by-step instructions for your mixes. So again, there's a link in the description box down below if you want to check out the mixing cheat sheet. And if you want to hang out with me a little bit more here on YouTube, I'll throw up a few other videos here from the My New Microphone YouTube channel. And I would also invite you to subscribe to this channel if you'd like more content similar to this. So click on one of these and I'll see you in the next one.